Hello everyone, today we're continuing our December series on Christmas, and in this episode we're going to discuss what is Jesus. Welcome to the Deep Psychology Podcast. I'm your host Ross Edwards, author, coach and podcaster. We cover deep insights into your psychology, helping you grow in psyche and spirit. Make sure to subscribe to Deep Psychology on Spotify or Apple to stay up to date. You can also visit the website deep-psychology.com, visited by tens of thousands of people every month for lots of free resources. If you want to go deeper with this work, you might like to do coaching with me, head to the website for more details. It's time for today's episode. Alright, so of course, if we're talking about Christmas, we're going to have to talk about Jesus at some point, right? And we actually covered it last week to some degree, although really not to any significant depth. And so that's what we're doing this week. You know, this is one of those big questions again that we're addressing in this series this month. And what I said last week was that essentially Christmas is a celebration of Christ, and that Christ is your true nature, or our true nature. And so celebration is essentially a celebration. Christmas is essentially a celebration of your true nature. And though that really nicely summarizes it, there is a lot to say. And so today we're really just going to go into depth and really understand what I'm talking about here and how it relates to Christmas and how it relates to Christianity and so on. I just want to say that this episode is not about Bible stories. So I'm not going to be sitting here telling you about the nativity story, and I'm not going to be telling you about the miracles that Christ supposedly performed. You know, I'm really not going to be talking about the Bible at all. Like, I will mention it because it's relevant, but in terms of like the sort of mythical Christmas stories that we all know, I'm really not going to be mentioning them. So if that's what you wanted, then that's not what you're going to get. And if it's not what you wanted, then good, you might be in the right place. It's not about fundamentalist Christianity. So obviously in typical Christianity, they have it all, they have the answers, and they give you the answers, and they say, well, this is what Christ is. You know, he was a historical figure. He lived 2,000 years ago. He was born 2,025 years ago on Christmas Day and all of this stuff. So it's not that either. So I'm not going to be giving you sort of typical facts about Jesus's life from a fundamentalist perspective and kind of asking you to believe me. It's really very different from that. And I'm also not going to be explaining the life of Jesus. So I've sort of alluded to this, but this is not like a historical, archaeological, anecdotal episode. This is about spiritual transformation, okay, and that's my angle. So just so you know, because if you're not aware of that, you might be shocked when I start talking here. So you might be asking, well, if this is not what you're talking about, then what on earth are you talking about? Because Jesus Christ, that's what Jesus Christ is. You know, he's like the prophet of Christianity, and you know, he's the one that, you know, is like the main character in the Bible and all of this stuff. And yes, if I'm saying that that's not what I'm talking about, you might be wondering, well, what's left? What could you possibly be talking about? And the reality of it is that Jesus Christ is a very sort of... the word simple is a tricky word to use here. I want to say it's a simple truth. You know, it's not enormously elaborate. And it doesn't require belief or stories, and it doesn't require memorizing things. It's a realization. We're talking about a direct first-person spiritual reality here. And however, even though they are simple and they're very direct, and it's ultimately in your hands whether you will ever understand for yourself on a personal level what Jesus Christ is, it's still completely life-changing. And we don't want to trivialize it or oversimplify it. So I will be giving you very sort of simple definitions and simple pointers and so on, but I'm just trying to capture the essence of it. I could go on and on about the sort of ramifications of this. Who knows? And maybe a future book of mine I will. Who knows what will come? But essentially, Jesus Christ is a very simple thing. It's something that isn't just a Christian thing, really. They obviously don't use the word Jesus Christ in, say, Hinduism or Buddhism, but essentially the concept is the same, or it might not be exactly the same, but they're in the same ballpark as other concepts in other spiritual traditions. So that's the angle I'm coming from. And furthermore, Jesus Christ is sort of the direct first-person contact with your spiritual nature, your true nature, as I'll be calling it. And things like Jesus are your embodiment of it and how you bring it out into the world. So I'll go into more depth in a few moments here about all of these things, but basically the words Jesus Christ, and Christ, to differing degrees, and they play different roles, but essentially they're symbols that are pointing you to your true nature and your embodiment of it. So obviously we've got the words, but with those words come, visual symbols, like the man, Jesus, and the cross, and these other things. So all of the symbols associated with Jesus Christ, and Christ are pointing you to your true nature. It's as simple and as complicated as that. And as far as sort of the Bible goes, and as far as sort of the traditional Christian perspective on this is, listen, I'm not going to get involved in debating historical records and archaeological records. I actually don't know. I've not researched these things. Like I don't know whether it's all just hearsay or whether it actually is like hard historical archaeological evidence. My point is that it actually doesn't matter for our purposes. Listen, if you're a serious spiritual practitioner, I'm just going to be very blunt and honest about it. It doesn't actually matter if Jesus even existed as a person or not. It actually doesn't matter. Because these are symbols that are trying to point us to something, right? And so we could sit here and debate if Jesus was real or not, but ultimately, if you're not understanding Jesus for yourself and how it applies to you, it doesn't actually matter whether he existed or not, because if you've not undergone spiritual transformation, Jesus can exist or not exist, and you've still not undergone it. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change your level of consciousness. It doesn't change your knowledge of yourself. And so that's the angle I'm taking. I actually suspect he probably didn't exist. Like if you had to pin me my perspective down, but it doesn't matter. That it's really not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the transformational aspect. And these concepts are only useful to the extent that they help you understand your true nature and live it out in your life. Everything else is just secondary, and it's, it might be nice to talk about over a beer or something, but when we, what do we want? Do we want to sit here and believe things, or do we actually want to have transformation in our lives? And I know what I would much prefer. So let's go now into what is the heart of Christ and Jesus Christ. We'll start with Jesus. Sorry, no, I do apologize. We'll start with Christ because it's more fundamental than Jesus Christ. Like if you don't understand what Christ is, you're not going to understand what Jesus Christ is. And listen, we covered this last week. We'll just be going in a bit more detail this week. What I said last week is that Christ just basically means Christ consciousness, which is basically awakening to your true nature. So it's you awakening to your true nature. And I put the emphasis on you because the spiritual path is about you. Let's be very clear here. It's kind of like, imagine we were talking about learning the guitar right now. Ultimately, everything I'd be saying is about you and your own guitar skills. It's not about sitting and analysing other people's skills and their own guitar journey and all the rest of it. And I'm saying this because I see so many people making this mistake. Just not really internalising the messages of spirituality. And it's just such a huge trap. So whenever I'm talking about Jesus Christ, I'm talking about you, right? And I'm talking about myself. This is the foundation of spirituality, Jesus Christ. It's an awakening to your true nature is the foundation of spirituality. Really what it is, it's a transformation of identity. That is what Jesus Christ entails, awakening to Jesus Christ. And let me explain why, because basically the way that most human beings live, and if you don't believe me, look around you and look at yourself and you'll quickly notice that this is the case. It doesn't take much, investigation. Is that basically most of us are identified solely with our mind and our body. And really it's mostly our mind. Really we think we are our mind. And we think we are this person that our mental concepts create and construct and maintain moment to moment to moment, to such an extent that if you're hearing me saying this, you probably think I'm crazy. So this is just a fact. This is like a spiritual fact. This is like it's almost a metaphysical fact. It's an epistemological fact first and foremost. Look at your own experience, your epistemology. Look at your own experience and see how identified you are with your mind and your persona, right? And that very realization is like the very beginning of spirituality. It's quite simple, but it's a huge thing to really realize, and it takes a long time to really understand the depth of it. Not only that, so not only are we identified with our mind and body, and I said mostly our mind, emphasis on mind, because most of us are so identified with our mind that we don't really identify with our body very much. Our body even seems separate from us. Not only that, we also feel separate from the world around us. We feel separate from our senses, and senses just mean hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, feeling. And I just mean everything, everything in the world around you. So, for example, you feel separate from the room that you're sitting in, probably. You feel separate from your partner. You feel separate from your friends. You feel separate from the people you work with. You feel when you're walking down the street, you feel separate from the world around you. It feels like you're over here and the world is over there, and other people are over there. And that is the default human state, to put it quite starkly. So this is where the transformation of identity comes in. With spirituality, what happens is you begin to realize that this mind and body and this sense of separation from your senses is not the whole story. And what can eventually happen, and this is quite rare, I have to be quite honest about it, it's quite rare, but it's possible. You can come to identify with the entirety of your mind-body experience as being yourself, and you can have deep perceptual insights into mind-body sense experience. In other words, instead of being identified with the human or with the persona or with the identity, with the thing that you think has your name, you become identified with just everything you're experiencing right now. And you realize that your mind-body identity is functional, but not ultimately truthful. It's not an ultimately truthful identity. It's actually a false identity. In spiritual language, we can say that this is like going from hell to purgatory to heaven, from samsara to nirvana, from egoic consciousness to Christ consciousness, and so on. Like all religious traditions, all spiritual traditions refer to this to some degree. And of course, even Christianity, hell to heaven. This is what it is. It's egoic consciousness to Christ consciousness. That is what hell and heaven are. So that is what Christ and awakening to Christ is in a nutshell. It's a transformation of identity, accompanied by perceptual insights into the nature of experience. And we're going to come back to this point nearer the end of the episode. Right now, what I want to do is switch into talking about what is Jesus Christ. And again, quite a simple idea, a simple thing to summarize, but very profound, and really, it's hard to really overstate what this would do to your life. Jesus Christ is your embodiment of Christ consciousness. Think of it as embodying your true nature, as embodying truth. So Christ is like the spiritual reality, your spiritual true nature, and Jesus is like the human part. Jesus is a name after all, and it's what Jesus Christ basically means is, okay, you've got your Christ consciousness, but how do you embody that? Do you embody it? Do you embody it in an altruistic manner? Or are you a devil with it, essentially? And so this is like the realization of your true nature expressed through your personality into the world and through the world. And, well, words fail us when we start talking about self and world, but this is what it is. And realizing your true nature, as all spiritual traditions point out in one way or another, has certain predictable effects. Things like compassion, goodness, inner strength, solemnity, wisdom, morality, truthfulness, and lovingness. So these, when you realize your true nature to some extent and you begin embodying it more and more, these traits aren't guaranteed, but you will see a sort of trend over time. They will come out in you more, and they're not binary things. So it's not like you're either loving or you're not loving, or you're either good or you're not good. These things are a spectrum. Ultimately, as human beings, we have darkness inside us. We have things that are essentially immoral and essentially not good. And I don't mean that in a dogmatic way. I mean it in a sort of developmental sense. We go through many stages of moral development. We go through many stages of values development, and the tendency is for our development to increase, but there's no guarantee. But what we do know is that living, sort of discovering your true nature and embodying it, does have fairly predictable effects. So that's what Jesus Christ is. It's basically the perfect, it's sort of an archetype. It's the perfect human embodiment of your true nature, of our true nature. I guess one sort of caveat I would have, and it's a subtle one, but it's really important, is that developing these qualities is not the same as realizing your true nature. Don't mistake causality with correlation here, because what typically happens in a lot of spiritual circles is they look at these positive qualities and they say, well, if we just develop those positive qualities, then we're spiritually enlightened. And I'm going to say, listen, while those are very noble goals, right, and while those are very desirable, you cannot replace direct spiritual understanding. And actually, I think direct spiritual understanding is a very rare thing. And you cannot just put all your stock in these traits, in developing these traits, and thinking that it will lead you to understanding your true nature. You have to realize that these are side effects of understanding your true nature. And yes, of course, if you've studied or practiced any spiritual tradition, you'll realize that, ethics and so on, embodiment is part of the path, right? Okay, but it still doesn't mean that you can replace. Okay, so I'm not saying we don't focus on these things, but I'm saying you cannot just focus on them, and doing so will not necessarily get you to your true spiritual nature. That's a really important thing to distinguish, and I'm being honest, I think a lot of spiritual teachers do not make the distinction, because it's sort of easier to talk about love and kindness and goodness and compassion and wisdom and so on. It's more presentable, it's easier to market, it's easier to sell it, people will buy it, people's identity isn't threatened. In certain ways it's actually bolstered, because they then just become identified with being like a bodhisattva or a Jesus type or whatever. So what I'm saying is, we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We want direct spiritual understanding, and that will lead us to these traits. Not necessarily, it's not guaranteed, but it's quite predictable and it's quite likely. And funnily enough, the Bible actually points you to this. Again, I don't want to go into the Bible stories, because you're going to hear them for the next few weeks. And that's not my role here. And to be honest, I'm not a huge Bible student. But what I can say is that the sort of allegories and the kind of myths around Jesus, including the nativity, is all pointing you to one, awakening to your true nature, and two, embodying it. In other words, they're pointing you to Christ and Jesus Christ. But again, don't look outside yourself. Don't make the spiritual path about someone else at some other time in some other place. This is about you. And so all of these things are essentially pointing to you and your own sort of spiritual path, your own spiritual realization. So it's really as simple as that, to really distill it down. Christ is about awakening to your true nature. Christ is your true nature. Christ's consciousness is awakening to your true nature. And Jesus Christ is just embodying your Christ consciousness. And the archetype of Jesus is just sort of the perfect embodiment, like perfect knowledge, perfect wisdom, compassion, and so on, right? What we're going to talk about now is, what is your true nature? Because I've talked about it, right? I've sort of spoken about, well, your true nature is this and it's that, but I don't feel like I've really given it the attention it deserves. So let's talk about this. And it gives me a lot of pause trying to talk about this concisely, because I've actually, I've got a book on the way that talks about your true nature and how to realize it. And so it's not a simple thing. I mean, it's also not amazingly complicated. It's just a very subtle thing, and it requires a mode of experiencing that, quite honestly, most people never have. So yeah, but let's have a stab at it. So first of all, I think it's important to say, when I say your true nature, I'm not talking about your authentic self as a personality. I'm not talking about going away and finding yourself on holiday somewhere. I'm not talking about removing social conditioning and finding what your true desires are. I'm not saying these things are bad. I'm just saying, let's be clear about what we're actually talking about here. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about an actual lived, experiential transformation of identity, a transformation of who you think you are moment to moment. That is, and it goes beyond personality. It's not about personality. It's also not it's not detached from personality. It's just transpersonal. It's transagoic. That's what I mean by true nature. Your true nature is simply the entirety of your mind-body experience right now. And this includes all your sense of past and future. It includes your ordinary sense of self. You feel like you live in this head and you have these thoughts and you're this person and you've got this history and you've got these desires and longings. That's your ordinary sense of self. And it includes all sense of inside and outside. And I don't mean inside your house, outside your house. What I mean is the world is divided into self and other from your perspective. It feels like you're somewhere over here, close to you, your sort of center, and outside is everything else. Everything's beyond the boundary of your body is not you. So what I'm basically saying is that everything you know, everything you perceive, everything you experience is within your current mind, body, sense experience, and you are not a fragment of it. You are actually all of it. And this is not an intellectual thing. This is something that you, without trying to dramatize it or sort of make it sound sexy, you have to go through a sort of transformation or even like a transmutation process to discover that this is actually true. We can also say that your true nature is pure, open, groundless spaciousness that includes everything. Again, just words. They might sound sexy, but again, I'm just trying to name the reality of it as starkly as I can. We can also say it's isness. Isness. What on earth do I mean by isness? Well, as I said, there's nothing separate from your mind, body, sense experience. There is nothing separate from you, so it just is. You cannot find it. You cannot sort of work towards it. You can't go out there hunting for it. It just is. It is isness. It is right now-ness. It is the sort of condition of absolutely everything moment to moment to moment within your awareness, because there's nothing outside your awareness. And here's the big mindfuck about all of this. We're talking about Jesus Christ and we're talking about awakening and discovering our true nature and all of this. There's a deeper truth here, and it's one that you only discover once you really start to embody it. Is that basically you already know everything that I'm saying. You already know your own true nature better than I do, better than anyone else does, and better than any words can possibly describe. You cannot find your true nature anywhere other than right here. And right here doesn't mean where you're sitting right now. Right here means your experience is absolute. And you cannot move beyond it. And you cannot... it just is. You cannot move outside of it. It just is. It is. That is the discovery. And so Christ is right here. Jesus Christ, in other words, you embodying Christ, are right here. If you can just consciously live the realization of Christ, which is kind of an oxymoron in a deep level, it is an oxymoron, because we all know our true nature. It's just it's like an optical illusion. We all see. If you're looking at an optical illusion, it's not that you don't see the hidden picture. That's not really accurate. It's more like a perceptual thing. It's more like a perspective thing, right? So that's what we're seeing here. So that is the message, that Jesus Christ is simply the realization of your true nature. And yes, the spiritual path is all about this. And yes, there are many teachings on this. And yes, they're absolutely necessary. I've done my years of spiritual practice and I continue to. But ultimately, at the deepest level, it's not inaccurate to say that you cannot find it. It is right here. And you are truly awakened to it. So, that is all I have to say about what is Jesus. And I really hope that if you're on a serious spiritual path, that this has really resonated with you. I really appreciate you tuning in to this episode. And if you're liking this December series, I'm going to have a couple more episodes this month, continuing to talk about Christmas. And make sure to subscribe on Spotify or Apple to keep up to date with those. And if you like, you can also try a free 20-minute coaching session with me to see if we're a good fit for one another. Thanks very much, and I will see you very soon for the next episode.